And just to sort of drill down a little bit further into that, then, have you got any that you could actually name? Any of these projects, initiatives, whatever you'd like to call them, and the people that are behind them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the projects is there's a term called biomimicry, and it's basically there's a set of scientists. I mean, what is really, really interesting, bearing in mind I went around the world and I collected insights and wisdom and knowledge from a lot of people, from a lot of nationalities, a lot of continents. What came out of it for me is that if you drew an axis between Britain and West America, predominantly California and Oregon, most of the insights, most of the inventions, most of the pioneering research and development is actually coming out of California and Britain. And that was amazing.
Wow.
If it would have, it does shock you. But, as far as the environment study, you don't forget in Britain, we've got the Met Office, which is based here. We've got the Hadley Climate Centre next to the Met Office in Exeter and Devon, which is the world's top study centre of climate. And we've got the Schumacher group. We've got all of these other amazing green-based organisations and NGOs, and we've got the same in California. And now I didn't purposely look out to approach mainly American and British people, but that's the way the projects led me to these people, because they seem to be the ones that are looking ahead and looking at pioneering projects. And to give you an example, coming back to the point, biomimicry basically is studying nature and looking how nature is an amazing development that has evolved over millions of years, and how we as humans can study nature on a finite level and learn to use energy that is resourceful, non-wasteful. I mean, this is a fact. Nothing in nature is ever wasted. We as a species, as humans, throw out so much waste. But if you study the whole line of nature, right the way through from the smallest organism right up to the largest mammals, nothing in nature is ever wasted. There is no waste.
No.
What is someone's waste on one system is food for another.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
biomimicry is basically the simplest example is the solar cell. You look at a leaf and what it does with the sun, and we've developed solar panels. And what is the great thing about biomimicry as a term now is that it's starting to be mimicked in other ways. The frog, the way it's got a sticky paw on its legs, and the way it can stick. We use that now in adhesives. And another project which is really interesting is run by a life coach called Fiona Harold, who runs a system in prisons, because her belief, we've such a big problem now in this country with the penal system. We think it's bad here in the UK. You want to look in the US, where they're quite happy to stick someone away for 50 years without any form of rehab or any form of emotional intelligence training. What Fiona and what some of her contemporaries and peers in the States are doing is looking at the way that we tutor and teach and help prisoners to heal. Because what comes out of this research, what she's done a lot of research, and she now goes into prisons and teaches prisoners the art form of writing. Because what is coming out of this whole thing about using writing as a form of healing is that when you can write down the bones to your emotional issues from the past, when you start bringing it out into the open, you can start to fix it, heal it, understand it, and start to analyse it. And she realises this, and so do a lot of people in America. One of the guys that I tried to get into the book, unfortunately couldn't, was a guy called Penny Baker, who works now for the American military. And what he says is that all these people are coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and from around the wars in the world, these ex-soldiers, and what they've got is all this pent-up frustration and anger and annoyance life and society. So what they're doing, they're taking this out into society, and they're becoming a murderer, they're becoming a bully, they're becoming a woman beater, or whatever, is their stuff. And what Pennybaker is saying, no, these people that come back, they're not prisoners, but in their own mind they're prisoners. We need to start getting these people to write down their stuff and to get this emotional anger out in ways onto paper where they, counsellors, therapists, can start to work through it. And so that is just a couple of projects, but there was another 200-300 projects that I came across.
Yeah, I mean, I can sort of, again, relate to that scenario about writing things down. As a coach myself, one of the things that I talk to people about doing is when they feel anger or frustration or things like that, is to actually write it down. Write a letter, for example, to the person that you're blaming this frustration on, and explain to them what you're feeling. Because it's very, very, very therapeutic. And so I already do acknowledge that technique as being a very sound thing. So anyway, moving back to the discussion in hand, you have said that the society that in which we live is changing and has to change even more, become more radical in its change in the decades ahead if we are going to survive. So what do you personally feel this will take before the majority of us begin to change their old ways and bad habits? Can people in big business, for instance, really see the bigger picture quickly enough and see where we are heading if no changes happen? Or are they so fixated with their own lot that they're going to ignore the larger issues such as depleting natural resources, etc., including oil and food, and having this ballooning population to feed?
I think the first thing I'd like to make a big point about, there's a lot of big corporations that do not want, this sounds bizarre, but there's a lot of big corporations that do not want society to heal. They make a lot of money out of us being stuck and fixed where we are at the moment. One example is the pharmaceutical companies. Why would pharmaceutical companies, which are the biggest profit makers one of the biggest profit makers in the world, outside of those that sell bottled water, why would these companies who invest, now we're talking trillions around the world, investment, bigger than the banking system, why would these companies want us to get better? So straight away, and the same with all the research that goes into the whole military operations around the world. Governments that are linked, particularly America, particularly UK, that are linked to having a massive part of their economy directly influenced by the military and what we produce as weapons. Why would they want peace? Because war is big business, and it's big business for certain governments, which includes the US particularly. And so I think we're stuck in this point where actually a lot of big corporations would like us to be stuck.
So they've got a vested interest.
They have got an interest. And I think what I've learned in the project and speaking for, thousands of hours, sat with these people, interviewing them, meeting them, spending time on the phone or face to face. What has come out of the project for me is that we often, as human, nature, don't change until we're forced to. And as much as we can have great intentions, it's when change is thrust upon us that we have to remold and transform and change. Kicking and fighting. And I think what is happening now in society, where we're really being asked to look at our values, we're not going to have as much cash in our pocket, or most of us aren't. We're going to have to look at the way we spend money on food. People are not going to have the money they had yesterday to simply sell a property here or there and get money, or to do what most of us have been guilty of, which is to use our property as a bank that we can draw money off and borrow more against our mortgage value. So I think all of these things are starting to make us look at the way that we're changing our thinking. And again, in the next few years, we're going to have more power cuts. This is fact. We're going to have more power cuts. We're going to have more problems around the world with water. The climate is going to make us change. It makes our business change already. If we have bad months in a particular time of the year in any particular part of the world, whether it's flood, snow, overheat, as in Australia's situation for the last 5 years, we are being forced now to change. And I think those changes are going to make us start to analyse who we are and where we're going.
Okay then, so taking that little point that you've just made there, or rather that bombshell that you've just dropped, bottom line, do you consider yourself as an optimist?
I think the only way you can live is to be an optimist. But to be an optimist, I think you have to be a pragmatic optimist. And I've met too many people around the world that close their eyes completely to all the negative news, to all what I call reality out there. And I think it can be just as bad to be naive as it is to watch the 6 o'clock news and the bad news every day. I think it's you can go too far the other way. I think you need to have a mixture of both. You need to have one foot in the daily pragmatic, this is what's happening at the grounded level, no matter how much the pain and suffering hurts us in the news. But I think we need to have another eye on the fact that actually bad news does sell, and that the world is never as bad as we think it is. That it's unfortunate that the media, most of the media, you can go to certain media agencies around the world now where they're starting to give a more balanced view. They're trying to give a more over-round view that there are positive stories out there of new businesses starting up, of new inventions, of new innovations. So I think it's about getting if you're going to be a optimist, be a pragmatic optimist, keeping an eye on both rather than sort of just the one.
I don't care what you say though, Bill, you are never going to interest me in football. I'm sorry, but my door is firmly closed on that one. So I'm very conscious of the length of this, so I think we'll sort of start to wind it down now. So can you give us a little bit of an insight into what work you're focused on at the moment?
I really talking about the whole emotional literacy subject. That's something I'm deeply passionate about and working with people around the world at, because it keeps coming back to the same problem in society, is that no matter what nation you sort of study and look at, we're not very good in schools of teaching emotional literacy. When you look at 95 or whatever, something ridiculous like 90% of all murders in the world are carried out when somebody just loses their emotions for 1 second, for 10 seconds, for 1 minute. Very few murders or horrendous injuries that one person does to another are carried out and are planned. Most of it is on the moment where we're not taught to control our emotions, and we lose a concentration for a second, and before we know it, we've done something, we've said something irrational, or we've looked to maim someone, hurt someone. And what I would love, absolutely love, is if we could take emotional literacy and give it the deserved importance and study that it needs, because I think emotional literacy in any form would help so many of us, all of us, to control our emotions and realise that if we controlled our emotions, we wouldn't lose it suddenly because we've stored up all this anger. And also, which I've studied a lot, is people being able to bring their emotions out at the time they arise. That seems to be, for me, from all the therapists and counsellors I've talked to, that seems to be the most effective way of living a sane, balanced life, is if we are angry about something, having the confidence to go and confront that person and not just holding it in. Because so many we've all done this, so many arguments we have with one partner, with one friend, with one colleague, aren't about that actual situation. They're a build-up of several situations that we've had.
Very much so.
You know, and so emotional literacy for me would be the big subject.
Great. Well, Bill, thanks ever so much for giving our listeners this insight into your ordeal that night in 1999 and to the events that have followed on from it. I wish you every success for the future.